about 6 or so. We're gonna go through some slides that represent some of what we heard last time in February and where this is going. And then after that, about 30 minutes, we will take and start talking with you about some of what you've heard, what you've seen, some of the other maps out there, and then we'll wrap up hopefully before 7. So for the next 20 minutes or so, feel free to wander around, staff. You know, if you see anybody that looks like staff, grab them and say you've got a question, and we will try to help you out.
I talked to that.
Okay. If you could find a way where you can see the screen, don't have to be up here, grab a chair in the back if you'd like.
Kind of wide and very,
Thank you for attending, or especially attending a second time. Our February opportunity to talk with most of you. We're back tonight with our team to talk a little bit about what we've heard, how we want to go forward, get your opinions on that progress, and then we will move that into our next round. We'll show you some next steps at the end. We're going to go through a couple of quick slides, a reminder of where we are for our comprehensive planning process. So this is required action by the Growth Management Act, state law, and that's what drives us. We have to do it every 10 years. We look at annual changes to see how we're leading our markets. And then we also do a 5-year kind of a midstream check as we move on. What we're really trying to do differently from the county's perspective. And remember, when we work with the city and the City of the Valley and the other cities, try to be cooperative and coordinate how development is occurring, but we operate mostly on the edges. And so we've got these subdivisions that happen in what we call the urban growth areas. We try in this round, we're trying to make those more like real neighborhoods and not just standalone places with a crop of homes in the middle of them. And that's what we talked about in February. We've got some results to show you. And it's key to remember that this plan does drive growth, and we try to be market responsive to that, but it's also about being efficient with public resources. It's better to grow in areas where you can use infrastructure that you've already put in the ground and paid for than it is to have to build new stuff every time you do something. So we've got all of that going together, and you can see the bottom line. We have to be done by the end of 2026. The legislature gave all of the 10 counties that are in this 2026 group an extra 6 months like they did with the 24 and the 25 groups. So we now have until December, which gives us a chance to work through these new issues, but also come back and talk with you more often toward the end of this, when we're starting to go from writing those plan goals and policies into the code itself that will guide development. So having that 6-month cushion is a nice bonus for us. So with that, we're going to move right into kind of the guts of what we're doing tonight. And one of our consulting team from Cascadia Consultants is up here. This is Riley.
Yeah.
She's going to lead us through part of this, and then we'll keep moving. So if you think of questions, interrupt or write them down. We'll get to everything when we can, and we'll talk to you in a bit.
Awesome, thanks. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Riley, and I'm here with Cascadia Consulting, along with Eric Carson in the back. You may have seen our few posters back there. And our team is really here to assess climate vulnerability. And what that means is looking at climate change risks that might be happening in this area, and who is most susceptible or at risk of those, how they might be impacted, and how can we address those communities most impacted to make sure that they're not. There we go. So for this area, the climate impacts that we found are pretty similar throughout the county, but things like wildfire and wildfire smoke are increasing and affecting communities. stream temperatures, stream flow, and inland flooding, increased temperature, as well as precipitation changes, snowpack, and drought.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay,
Ian.
okay, great. Well, thanks, Riley. And we've got some more of Cascadia slides a little bit later on. So yes, and if you've been to one of the earlier workshops in February, you already saw these couple of slides, but we wanted to provide a primer for folks who were not there. And then we're glad that everyone's here, whether you were there in February or not. Placemaking is a lens that we're using to focus our efforts on the comprehensive plan, especially in this early stage of the comprehensive plan. Before we get into the alternatives development, when we're really trying to think about knowing that there's going to be some growth, what we would like that to look like and how we would like the elements to fit together into something that is a great place. It can be a great place, can be any different kind of thing, could be in the middle of the city, could be in the middle of the countryside. It could be something natural, it could be something man-made. But there are places that feel like something that have meaning. And then there are other areas that don't, and I'm sure that you've been to both, and you can sort of feel the difference. The next slide, please. There's a few qualities that really are common throughout a lot of different kinds of great places. They're easy to get to and well connected to some other places and nodes of activity, so you start to get a little bit of a network coming together. These places are comfortable and project a good image. They may be a beautiful place, or at least they may be just comfortable and aesthetically okay. But however it works out, they attract people together to come and take part in whatever is going on. And this makes it a social environment that people want to come back to. And that creates interconnections between people, between different kinds of people, on different kinds of activities that are taking place. And the more of those different kinds of folks from different ages and backgrounds and are doing different things, you have this wonderful kind of multiplying effect of social interactions that are happening. And so a special thing is something we can actively try to create more of through our planning policies. And it gets a little bit abstract, or starts at a very abstract level. We're trying to bring that back to the planning level. Think, okay, the way our streets are set up, the way our homes and our businesses, how those are arranged, or our open spaces, how those fit together. We're trying to think about that, as you see on the posters, how you could actually actively make places. So we have some realistic tools. We can't wave a magic wand, but we can do things like this. Community visioning and activities, bring people together to start talking about the way we would like the county to be in the future, especially the new development. The way we would like the new development that happens in the county. What would we ideally like that to be? We can coordinate with property owners and developers. We will have plans, goals, and policies that will come out of the comprehensive plan. And updating those, because there already are plans, goals, and policies, so we can review the ones that are working, update, change some of the ones that aren't, maybe condense some of the ones that there's too many of. There'll be some updates to land use designations, which are a little bit more of a high level concept for the future use of land, and this will be a map of that. Bob will talk about that towards the end of our presentation, and then those are applied through zones, which is our regulatory tool that has specific rules right attached to each parcel of land. Civic leadership and investment is it's hard to cross control in this room, but of course it's a really important thing about having leaders that can see the merits of this plan and push it forward. And then there's all sorts of different nitty-gritty rule standards about connectivity, different design regulations that can encourage the kinds of development, the kinds of behavior patterns that we want to see, and discourage the ones that we would less like to see, but we might see because they're allowed in some way. But we want to encourage the things that we want, right? We want to make it easy to do the things that we want. So altogether, finding the mix of predictability and flexibility development codes is something that I think Bob will be talking about. Who's breaking it off? Yes. Oh, no, it's not. First, before I hand it off, is that we just wanted to recap a little bit from what we did already in February. We had a round of meetings. We met not in this room, but in an identical room that's just directly above. We also met in West Plains at the Endurance Center and in Mead at Mead High School. A great turnout, particularly great turnout from the Otis Orchard folks last time. And if any of you are here again, we're glad to have you again. We wanted to focus on different urban growth areas on different sides of the county, and that's why there was the 3 meetings. We heard some great stuff, some great feedback about development, about how it should be. There's, you know, the desires with new development, trails, open space, thoughtful design, affordability, connectivity. These are all the things that we would like if possible. In general, we want development to bring good stuff. We want it to bring better investments in infrastructure or services and amenities, so that development is contributing positively, right, to the county, not subtracting, not taking away what is already good. There are concerns, definitely concerns about the loss of rural character, about increases of traffic and crime. There's always potential things to monitor and managed. And there was also concerns about environmental conditions. I think this was really good for the team to hear about last time around. In different ones in different areas, but related to groundwater contamination, flooding, wildlife corridors, other things like that. And some acknowledgement that there has been in the past some loss of trust with the county, and maybe some things that the county is working on rebuilding, partly through these meetings, and partly through community engagement, and also through coming together and having a really solid new comprehensive plan that is kind of a fresh foot forward. Best foot forward, fresh start with our planning and zoning policies. So just been the broader high level things that we heard. We also did a visual survey. You can see the results on the poster in the back with the circles. We showed people a lot of pictures, slideshow. They could vote on them on their phones. If you have not done this yet, you can still do an online version of it. There's links on the website and also on a QR code on the poster back there that you can scan your phone and do it real quick. Just a 1 to 5 scale of different images. These are the top scoring ones. We've got a trail oriented neighborhood. So like a new subdivision, but with integrated open space and trails. So you can get out your door and walk around and meet your neighbors and be out in the world without having to drive 10 miles. Beveridge Place or Beveridge Place, I think is an example of a nice sort of small retail, commercial building, but it's integrated with the neighborhood and it's a place for people to come together. We had a Camino Commons, which is again a commercial environment, but it has a shared open space that really invites people to interact and to goof around while they're visiting the local businesses. We had a craftsman style duplex. We showed images of both neighborhood scale, large scale things and buildings. And this was one of the most popular buildings was just it's a duplex. Okay. It's not a single family house, shared walls, but it's nicely done. It's got style. People respond well to that. And then the streetcar suburb, we showed an example of that from Spokane, the historic development pattern from 100 years ago when there were streetcars, right? And Monroe in that example, but where there's a pattern that kind of links together the businesses and the homes and the open space in kind of a coherent structure. There were also some things that were less popular. You can see there, then some multifamily that was not particularly well done. Some development patterns with a lot of pavement, that really emphasize garages, or in some cases where you've got kind of really intensely different things that are not at all connected to each other and kind of walled off from each other. Those were the photo images that received the lowest scores, again, when people are doing these surveys. So those things we've sort of taken that input in, thinking about that, thinking about what you guys are saying tonight, and trying to weave it into a strategy for new development.
So that's what we tried to do. I'm Bob Bayford, partner with Makers Architecture, again, helping the county out with the placemaking part of the comprehensive plan update. And so we took this input that we heard and the approach, and we tried to create a vision statement associated with placemaking, and I'll read that out to you. This is just the first draft of this, but Spokane County's urban or suburban lands are a mix of vibrant and connected communities. They feature integrated parks, trails, natural areas, and civic gathering places, a mix of housing types, and an accessible pedestrian-friendly neighborhood center. A neighborhood center meaning all probably having shops and a mixture of uses serving the community. They will also be resilient and integrate natural features as a community amenity. So that was our attempt at a brief paragraph integrating some of these ideas. And so it's up there on the poster too. It'd be good to know. Well, if you have any comments on that, so write them down and there you go. There's post-it notes that you can put
Okay, good.
on if
Posted
you
there,
have
so you
some
can-
comments. If we missed
Right on the
anything,
poster there.
said anything wrong, but we'll dig into some of these policy ideas that would then implement this. So a big part is there's gonna be the land use element is one of the key elements, and the land use element deals with the urban lands that are in the urban growth area. And then there's also, we'll need to deal with the rural lands, which are most of the county lands, but we're mostly talking about the urban lands here, where we're talking about placemaking. And it came up with, we're probably gonna do some updated organization of the land use element in regarding the urban section. And this is just a listing of some of the umbrella goals and topics that we'll dig into. From growth management, community design, transportation, kind of coordinating land use and transportation. Community gathering places is an important aspect, particularly for placemaking. And then neighborhood uses and development. And then a couple just dealing with the different types of development, having a different goal regarding commercial development. Another one, obviously, industrial development is super important. So having a separate umbrella goal under that. And then environmental design and resiliency, I'll talk about that shortly here. And then another aspect that's not really reflected in the current comp plan all that much, but we think is important, and we want to get folks comments on that, is historic and cultural preservation in the county. And then when we're getting back into placemaking, these are some of the 6 key policy elements of that. And so I'll dig into these in the next few slides here. So the first one just being, you heard Riley talking about climate change and resiliency. But the idea here is that each of these areas has their own set of environmental features. And I think part of the idea with placemaking is let's integrate these features and make them a positive part of the community and the place. And so and part of that is designing communities to be resilient. There's gonna be change, but let's make these communities resilient. Let's also take advantage of the environmental features and create a place and an amenity. So some of the details on this are identifying and protecting those critical areas. Integrating them, again, is designing your community around those and not just walling those features off, but designing your community in a way that creates an amenity out of that, creates value. Addressing and treating the stormwater runoff, and again, integrate. Just don't build in floodplains is a simple thing. Another thing is just elevating homes a little bit off the street, because there's just gonna be urban flooding as well. Conducting firewise practices. Providing multiple accesses in and out of the neighborhood. Again, I'll talk about connectivity. And then integrating more shade trees, mitigating summer heat. If you look at all the older communities and you look around, you see a lot of trees and big trees because they were integrated at the beginning. And so that's going to be a key, I think, when when developments come in, is just making sure that trees are integrated with that design. Because over a long term, that's gonna have a big positive impact. And Riley, do you want to take this slide as
Sure.
part of that issue?
Yeah, just building off a lot of the comments that Bob just made. This is an idea of how a neighborhood could integrate some of these ideas, and it's hard to see on this slide, the text is really tiny. If you want to learn more, there's a poster in the back here. But some of the key things to point out are just like the trees that were just mentioned, that these are maintained when developing the area as well as put in when they start, so that over time they grow with not only beauty, but shade and cooling practices. Also, you'll see some of the features are like mixed use development, so it's not all one standard type of home that looks the same. You're able to meet people where they're at, whether they're ready for an apartment or a townhome or a single family home with a yard. You're also building in green spaces. I know in this area, there's lots of beautiful features that, whether it looks like a flat park in here or it's built around natural rocks, other beautiful areas, those are being utilized rather than just started flat. And there's some other practices like green roofs, solar, other features that can be used to utilize the natural features to support that. So I know the text is really hard if you want to learn more. So the first way back from this one.
Thanks, Riley. Next slide. So the other big thing is street connectivity. And again, at the beginning, when you're laying out the subdivision, this is the time to get that done right. So the policy concept is create a connected grid of streets when developing new neighborhoods. It's pretty simple, really, and the intent is to accommodate development, promote walking and bicycling trips, and to create a unique sense of place. You can do that, and again, we use the same fictitious development to show kind of an example of it. It doesn't have to be a perfect grid of streets. It could be broken up a little bit. You might have trails in some cases or alleys instead of streets. There's just a number of ways to do it, but this just illustrating an example. In fact, the next slide gets into some details. So this is more of a detailed policy suggestion, and I'll walk through this. So what you really need to do is you eventually need to code this and have some minimum standards. So this says create connectivity maximum block size standards that apply to new large site development and redevelopment. And so part of it is providing some flexibility for large block sizes, provided you have through block connections. And those could be an alley, it could be a trail, it could be an apartment complex that has an access road that the public can use to get from A to B or cut through the site, for instance. But trails are being a really big one. Maximum block size, really, they should vary by zone, because you're gonna have zones that allow more intensity and less intensity. And then the zones that allow for a mixture of use. The zones that allow for more should have a finer grain, and generally should have smaller block sizes. So the policy is trying to recognize that difference. And so it says again, for mixed use type areas or commercial, generally the smallest, no more than 300 feet long between streets or between a through block connection street. And then again, they may be a mixture, as I said, of private streets, alleys, shared. Woodruff is what we call kind of a curbless shared street, where the cars share space with pedestrians and bikes. There's just no curbs, and cars go slower. And then again, pedestrian only connections. Next slide. So here's an example, and this has been in a number of codes that we've worked with and adopted, where you might say a maximum of 500 feet between public streets, but a maximum of 300 between like a public street and a through block connection. So you can't just have, notice that each of these blocks are a maximum of 300 feet, but there's a mixture of, the street, for instance, could be 500 feet away as long as you have the trail connection in between. So this provides a little bit more of a finer grain connectivity framework. And good examples of this are not far, or just upstream, I was gonna say downstream, but upstream here in Liberty Lake. The development is, they've done a good job of connecting to the Centennial Trail and providing trails and a good grid of streets. Next slide kind of illustrates these with the streets in blue and alleys and pathways in brown. So there's actually connections here. And then actually closer to us, I believe this is called Half Moon Park, I think. And then here you can see the connected system. And this is where they're, by creating this grid around the park, creating a sense of place with that connectivity design. And then I go to all those other connections. And so speaking of trails, then this is the next part. Trails are such a big, important part of new development area. In fact, I was telling somebody here, one of my jobs out of college was working on a county's riding and hiking trail plan, and they had the wherewithal in the 60s to create a countywide riding and hiking trail plan. And so as this particular county sprawled and developed in the 70s and 80s and 90s, they ended up with a huge trail network, because these were conditions of approval when these subdivisions went in, put these trails in. Now they benefit from somebody having the foresight to create that plan at the beginning. So later, I was the planner for Bonner County and out of Sandpoint, and was involved with folks there trying to create a trails plan, for instance. And this drawing here was from an effort we did in Vancouver, illustrating how you could do a mixture of housing types integrated around a trail system. So the concept here, actually go back real quick. So plan for and implement an expanded network of trails into new development. And then an example detail is, this is how you can code it and say, provide 1 foot of trail for every 3 feet of subdivision perimeter. And so in this case, an example, 10-acre subdivision with a perimeter of 2,600 square feet would require 880 feet of trails. And there's an example code from the state of, from Ridgefield that was adopted that implements this. And then the next slide shows kind of an example. This is where we looked at, we were working with Post Falls several years ago on this concept, and we drew a subdivision on a large site and tried to illustrate what that standard actually looked like. And so it was, you can see all these streets and arterials, there's existing development here. It was basically creating a separate trail that goes through a park and then kind of cuts behind homes. It's not, most of the trail is not next to a street, but it's separated and integrated with the subdivision. And then the next slide kind of shows with the aerial around it. So essentially it's that amount of trail is able to create a trail all the way through that subdivision. But we also thought it was a reasonable amount, not an excessive, but maybe a good minimum amount for, new subdivision. So that's an example. Next slide. And then these are just examples of trails that were integrated into a code. And then this was actually came out of that image that was in the visual preference survey. And this is another one that's integrated trails into those subdivisions and been very, very popular. And then the next thing here is park integration for the same reason. When you do new development, is to try to integrate these as an amenity and integrate the development around the park with the park, not just as a leftover space where homes back up against it and don't face it. So parks should be visible and accessible from homes and community members. And again, there's that example there. You see townhomes front on the park, and they actually have a walkway. So it's like the front yard. You got a lot of eyes on the park in that case, rather than having it walled. See a lot of parks where it's walled off. And then that's where the unsafe activity happens, because no one sees what's going on. And then having streets around the perimeter is important. So next slide. So a code concept is, this is what we've done elsewhere, say at least 60% of the park perimeter shall be bound by either streets or dwelling units that face the park. And again, here's some examples. This has streets all the way around it. So does this, but this has townhomes that front on it with they got their front entries off a sidewalk. This is the same thing. You know, you've got alleys serving as their vehicular access in the back, but rather than a street, it's simply a park with walkways around it. There's lots of cool things that you can do besides just building a grid of streets and homes that create value for the community. Corbin Park is a great historic example that elevates the whole neighborhood around it and values in a sense of community. And a newer version is your Olmsted Green. Did I get the name right? Just out of Kendall Yards. And there's going to be future development that face the park when it happens here to create that eyes on the space. But notice you've got parking and retail uses and townhomes all around it. So very visible. The next item is streetscape design being an important feature and how creating a sense of neighborhood. And so what we've said is design streets to minimize pavement widths, and I'll get into that in a minute, provide comfortable pedestrian access, integrate street trees, and also accommodate variety. You can create a variety of street widths, and naturally you're going to have streets that are going to need carry a little more traffic than others. But you might have streets that have parking allowed on one side instead of both. There may be segments of streets that you don't have any parking, it's just more of a lane, provided you have enough parking, off-street parking, on-street parking elsewhere. So these are some examples. You know, this street's wide enough that it could accommodate two-way traffic, but it's not too wide. You know, you can get through here, but you're not going to speed race through it. This one of the older down in South Hills, a little bit more narrow. You know, there's streets in Seattle like this where you have to weave sort of to get through. Especially when there's cars parked on both sides, but it works. A lesser desirable example is when you've got rolled curbs, no street trees in a pretty wide street. The other thing I forgot to mention here, the important thing is both of these have climbing strips of street trees, and then you got that detached sidewalk. But the street trees being a big thing. And I know that this is probably a little more expensive, but the long-term benefits of having that design, having those street trees is tremendous to the community. And so another feature of this is not walling off the neighborhoods, is designing like so. A lot of newer developments in these suburban areas, especially where I grew up in, will simply wall off the arterials. The arterials are just wall-lined speedways. And a different way to do it is having alleys along those lots that face the arterials and bigger setbacks. So this is in Bozeman, Montana, where we did some code work a couple of years ago. And this is then the opposite of this design out of Ellensburg, where again, you've got that wall-lined arterial, and that doesn't really create a good sense of neighborhood or community in that design. So neighborhood design is sort of just pulling all of these things together. So it's integrating the environmental design, street connectivity, trail and park integration, streetscape, design policies, but also integrating that, as Scott was talking about, a mixture of housing types, not just all one type, but trying to mix up single family, some duplexes, some townhomes. And there's an example of that that has a mixture of townhomes and stacked flats. And then, as I talked about with the streetscape earlier, is emphasizing neighborhood facing design over walled off facing design. Next slide. And a part of this too is a good part of mixing up your housing types is, as we say here, neighborhoods with a mixture of housing can effectively allow housing choices for the full range of life stages. And this is, Burke Consulting created this graphic, and Ian and I really like it. Because it kind of illustrates a neighborhood like this where you've got accessory dwelling units, fourplexes, duplexes, attached ADUs. It kind of allows for, this represents maybe a single person who has several life stage changes. You know, you got graduation, moving in together, lives in a duplex, first time homeowners, lives in a townhouse, growing family, moves into single family home. Unfortunately, some couples don't quite make it. Sometimes they get separated, they go back into the duplex again. Then you got empty nesters who might be in a accessory dwelling unit. And then you got your multi-household generation, where you might have, again, the house and an accessory dwelling unit. So it's just an interesting way to think about the housing needs, even at just one person's life.
Right, yeah, we think about, it's like different people need different housing types, but it's really, you could just be the same person needs different housing types, at just different stages.
And then I think this again just pulls everything together. So it illustrating a mixture of townhomes, duplexes, apartments, accessory dwelling units of single family. It also illustrates that street grid. Again, this being an arterial, having the alley. So you got homes, or it could be live work units right off the arterial street. Again, you got a grid, you're connected to a trail. In this case, there's a school here, you designed to put a trail there. You got an existing lower density single family. They were nice in putting their single family up against that and their more intensive development in the middle. Let's go to the next slide. And so I'm in the home stretch here, bear with me, but wanted to talk a little bit about the land use map and categories. This is your current land use, future land use map for the county. And some priorities here are, again, finding a way to help create neighborhoods designed to integrate these policies that we just talked about, and also include villages with commercial and employment centers within neighborhoods. Next slide. So what are they used for, these land use categories? Well, they're used to guide decisions that the county makes on the zoning map and also for the development regulations. So they're very important. Currently, you've got residential categories, mixed use categories, commercial and industrial, a lot of them, probably too many. And you just have general paragraph text describing them. We think that we could structure it a little bit better. What we suggest is more of an umbrella approach where we have fewer categories, but supported by multiple implementing zones. So, here's a sort of a crosswalk of our existing land use categories or designations. And so proposed is to consolidate, for instance, four. The four mixed use related designations into one called mixed use villages. Also potentially to combine medium density residential and high into one. And then for larger sites that haven't been developed, allow a little more flexibility, maybe call those neighborhoods where you could have a little bit more freedom in crafting where, what goes where. Because it's more of a blank slate. And then kind of leaving the industrial areas, kind of, they're looking okay, and regional commercial as well. Is that question?
Yeah, I have a question. So it's all you guys decided to know. Fixing the agriculture to apartments, but it's better than use, but when I see this, it's still saving. Why not just have the wild card element where it's who's commercial planning, but just all that, just like its own little district. Where anything goes, you know, I can do whatever you want to do.
Well, it depends on where it might be, but I think some of the mixed use villages and sort of get into that
If they're not,
kind of a situation.
you're gonna, that's expensive in those areas, so that'll be building.
But so then the other thing is, so I think you're getting to something that we're not farther off on. We've got the like existing context, we keep generally the structure, low, medium, neighborhood centers. Okay, because once the place is already built, you know, it's harder to say like, oh, actually. Your next door neighbor, that could be something really different, what's on the ground, you know. But for the new sites, there's a more flexible category that does encompass the densities and the neighborhood center. That's a commercial category, right? So it's introducing quite a bit of
Yeah.
flexibility of uses and building types for new sites, and then they would have again all these other policies related.
Does that help you seem like, so that you guys focus a lot on the new, I mean, new is cool, I think, but if you guys have existing parks, like, why not? You have some of the density and some existing parks to, for then reuse some of the existing infrastructure.
Well, that's a good idea. That's probably getting into the next steps, and there's a slide coming up on that, because we'll be getting into what the growth numbers are that we need to plan for, and that will get into alternatives, how to map these. So, but that's a good point, because we don't have to be stuck with
Yeah, just
what we have right now.
I just think if you guys really want, what you guys are sending on these images. Have phone notes, just, you know, like little district, like very district or whatever, but. These little districts that make a living like that, just make them go as anywhere.
Comment?
Hi, thanks, Paul. Where you say for new sites, are you talking about the area that is not now part of the urban growth boundary area that will expand?
In this case, I'm talking about large, mostly undeveloped sites within the current UGA. So outside is kind of another issue, but it could be.
That it would have the
If-
same rules that are
Yeah.
within the UGA.
If the county were to bring some of those in, and it happened to be a larger site that was, well, I'm not gonna bring up a specific property.
Okay.
but if it just happened to be a larger site where you could, you know, we might have a minimum acreage, you know, that kind of a designation applies to. I'll just throw out and say 10 acres, 5 acres or more, where you might have flexibility to do, you know, subdivision on a hot site, where you might want to mix things up. So, so that's kind of what I'm talking about. And so for now, it's largely what's in UGA right now, but it could also be if the city expands the UGA, it might apply to some of those extra areas too.
So if I have 5 acres and I'm within the UGA, they're suggesting that the zoning would change.
Well, the land use category might change to this neighborhood, and then there would be more freedom to adjust the zoning.
So the land use category is really neighborhood.
The land use is the land use plan, and then that's implemented by the zoning map. And so for neighborhoods, you could see that the implementing zones could be any of these.
Those are, oh, right, these are, that is sort of like a one-to-one.
Well, yeah, these
Right.
are, there's similar zoning, to these, so I'm just. I think I'm confusing it more. There's some more slides here that hopefully that will help. So here's an example of, along with these map designations, having good clarification for what these categories are. So having a clear purpose statement. So this is an example of if you created a medium density residential designation purpose, provide for a mixture of single, middle and multifamily housing types is a purpose statement. Having locational criteria, so we know where to map these areas. So intended for areas now characterized by and or appropriate for a mixture of housing types with close proximity to commercial services, transit access and or parks and other public recreational amenities. So it's trying to set up where it's appropriate for some parameters there that will help, future zone changes or even this comp planning process. The next step of this process, in fact, principal uses and densities. All residential uses, including middle housing forms and low to mid-rise apartment buildings, depending on the existing and planned context of the site. Because you might have, we also say implementing zones, and ideally there's a couple implementing zones, and they might be, one lower, medium, lower intensity zone. There might be a higher intensity zone with that. What we're trying to not lock into is saying, a specific density. This zone or this designation is for things up to 5 units per acre. We're trying to get away from that and be more form-based and talk about, the types of, middle housing, low to mid-rise. So that means like a low-rise building is generally 3 to 4 stories. Mid-rise is like 5 to 8 story buildings. And then we say, depending on the existing or planned context. So you might have an area that's now characterized by walk-up apartments that are 2 to 3 stories. So on the areas around it, maybe you want to stay kind of lower intensity and not have mid-rise in this context and stay consistent. So that's trying to set up a framework that's a little more clear and predictable, and I think sustainable as well. Next slide. And so again, this is that neighborhood designation where, this is a good example because this is the original site was in the town of Carnation in King County. And it's just basically a strawberry field. The city, it's in their UGA and they needed to plan for it. And they were, they wanted to get it right because once you subdivide it, that's the way it's gonna be, almost forever, or for our lifetimes. So we tried to show a good example that illustrated a lot of the different things they wanted. And so we all thought that this kind of concept worked in this case as well, as illustrating all the placemaking elements. And so in our case here, these are you saw the maps back here, and they illustrate the urban growth areas in the East Valley. And a lot of it's already spoken for, a lot of it's already subdivided. There are some areas that still could be subdivided, but most of them are slope sites and they're not all that big. We thought maybe there's some larger sites that could have that neighborhood designation, but I think that might be more likely in West Plains as an area, when I think it could be more likely, at least than here. But we're looking at also the North Metro area. So this is the area by that first exit off where two comes in, to the south of it, where there's more developability down there. And then, this is the meat area where you've got all these different commercial zones. There's so many, you can't even read the map and differentiate the colors of all the mixed use and commercial designations. So we're proposing to combine many of those. Let's keep going here. I think we're almost done. So, next steps, is this Matt or? Yeah, all right.
Somebody's gonna check me on, pretty sure about the EIS, but right, but,
Hey, good evening, everybody. Thanks again for coming. My name is Matt. I'm the project manager for the consultant side, so we're helping keep the county on track and getting all the work product at the right time where it needs to be done, so the state can review it and we can get this adopted on time. I just kind of wanted to give you a brief overview of kind of where this goes from here. I know we're getting close to the end here. We want to have folks have another chance to hit up the boards if you want, but so this is the second and likely final round of workshops specifically focused on placemaking, but the work doesn't end here. So there's a few steps that kind of need to happen between now and when this actually gets put on maps for consideration as part of the environmental impact statement. The county's doing some internal work still, and you know, Scott can speak more to that as well if there's any questions, but the county's still honing in on its sort of analysis of existing conditions that will serve as the baseline for figuring out when we do make potential land use changes, what are we comparing it to? And that work will be wrapped up by, I think, around mid-May to the steering committee of elected officials. So county staff are working on that right now. Between now, so between the end of this meeting and then, the county staff and the consultant team are going to be focusing on taking the feedback from you all, as well as some of the things that the county is going to need to do just to accommodate the projected growth. And we're going to be starting to put together some development alternatives. So that means going from these ideas of, oh, this is a good development, this is a good potential development policy or regulation, and then actually, how is that going to look on the map? You know, where are we going to be making changes? When we do make changes, what kinds of standards are we going to be encouraging in those areas to get the kind of places that we want? And that's going to be occurring basically next week, so May through the end of June. The environmental impact analysis, so today is a very special day, not just because you are all here, but because the scoping notice for the environmental impact statement was published. And the EIS is what that's called, is kind of the environmental analysis that the county has to do on its comprehensive plan, because there are, you know, potentially significant changes to the development regulations and to future land use maps. So, you know, places that we're not anticipating very intense development in the past, maybe that map may be changing. So we need to kind of study the implications of that. So the scoping period for the EIS, that means like kind of what do we have to study, starts today, goes through May 30th. And there's going to be an EIS meeting on May 7th. Is that correct, Clay? Thank you. And that'll be virtual. So that's next week. And so between that meeting and the comment period, you can see all this on the project website. I'm sure that the fine folks from the county can hook you up with that on the way out if you have any questions. Is that we're going to be taking in input from people on things that kind of, you know, what shouldn't be touched, what changes should we see, kind of what should we be considering in the environmental analysis. So we're going to combine what we hear from you with what we hear as part of that scoping process to come up with these different kind of scenarios for how the county is going to accommodate the projected growth. So that scoping period goes through May 30th. There's kind of an overlap there, right? So and then starting from the end of this meeting, basically until the end of June, we have that time to take your input and scoping stuff into consideration. And we're really going to be working hard on the EIS, the draft EIS, basically from midsummer through the fall, sort of that July to end of September timeframe. We are having to do some you know, patting our heads and rubbing our bellies at the same time. So we've got, in addition to that, the actual plan, like the policies and goals in the plan, there's stuff that needs to change regardless of what comes out of the EIS. So there's state law that's changed and we gotta make sure that the plan is consistent with that. And add in all this new stuff that we're doing as part of what we're studying for placemaking purposes and under the EIS. We've already started that work, actually. Part of the first placemaking work was actually looking at, okay, so if we're gonna be taking this approach, what kinds of things would need to change in the land use element? So we've already started this work. We're working on the rural element, housing element. And that's gonna go all the way through the drafting of those elements, and the changes gonna go all the way through spring of next year. And then we'll have to be moving on toward adoption later in the year. Did I miss anything, Scott?
No, it's a very good summary. There are dozens and dozens of small tasks within all of those bullet points up there. So, yeah, we will do our best to keep all of you informed on that. We think we have most of your emails from the sales sheet. We'll add those to our list if we have them. And everything we do will be posted up there, so you'll be able to see progress and ask questions of us throughout that entire period.
Thanks. I know we're kind of at time, but I think if people wanna, if you still got dots, you wanna visit the boards on the way out, we would definitely encourage that, so.
You're allowed to vote twice if you want.
Yeah, you can put all your dots on one thing if you want.
Thank you for your.
Thank you,
time.
everybody.
Thanks for coming, and please